Hi, everyone. Welcome to MSI Injury Prevention. Today we have Donald McDonald with EWI talking to us about MSI prevention and the considerations of a return to work to office. Donald, I'd like to welcome everyone as well.
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, today we're gonna talk about some considerations for return to the office. And I was looking back, we actually did a similar talk back in July of last year when we were planning for a September return to the office, and we all know sort of what happened there. But I think we're doing it this time. So I've got some thoughts to share with you. And really, what I would say about today's presentation is, I'm not trying to sell you on one approach versus another. I just want you to be aware of the questions that you should be thinking about depending on what approach you're taking. And we'll kind of go through the three main approaches and give you some considerations. Because we're doing a recording today, we're going to try and save questions towards the end. The content itself won't take us too long to get through. So if you've got some questions, please hold on to those, and we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. And with that, I will get going. I'm just going to turn off my camera while I'm talking.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Donald, in regards to the recording. And also, if you have any questions along the presentation, feel free to use the chat button on the bottom, and I'll make sure I organize those questions that during the Q&A, then we can promptly address them. Thank you again.
Perfect. All right. So today's sort of agenda, we're going to look at working from home, what the reality was. And then the bulk of the time, we're going to talk about the three different scenarios that we're hearing from organizations. One option is that everyone returns to the office. Second option is that people continue to work remotely. And then the third option, which we're hearing from lots of folks, is a hybrid model. So some people working from home, some people working in the office, and some people doing a little of both. So as I mentioned, really the goal of today is to give you some things to think about. Depending on which scenario you're using, it's not intended to convince you that one is better than the other, but there are definitely considerations for each of those. And then we'll wrap it up and open it up to Q&A. I was saying to Rob before we got going here that my phone's been ringing pretty steady the last week as people are getting people back to the office, or as they're preparing for that. Definitely lots of questions from our health and safety folks, facility folks, HR people. We're getting lots of interest in looking for guidance around that. So here are some stats just to give you an idea of, the scope or breadth of the number of people that were working from home as a result of the pandemic. And these are some stats from during the pandemic. I don't have anything within the last little while as people have started to filter back. But if we look at these, large numbers that were impacted. So in one report, we saw nearly 3/4 of the 3.4 million Canadians who started working from home at the outset of the pandemic were still there in August of 2020. And I know that number might have fluctuated a little bit, but I'm sure it's been high most of the time since then, right across the country. And looking at some data from the US, we were seeing close to 90% of organizations still encouraging or requiring people to work from home. And the last stat, and this is where I think it's interesting to see what the approach is from people. And certainly early on in the pandemic, there was a high interest in continuing to shift some employees permanently to remote work after COVID. And that there's a number of factors that play into that, the type of work that the people are doing, whether they have lease space, all those sorts of things. But the number of people working from home, although it may decrease with the pandemic ending, there will still be more people working from home at the end of this than there were at the beginning. So we need to think about that. I joked, I use these pictures in a lot of my presentations during the pandemic, that, you know, when people would initially hear about, you know, folks working from home, I think this is what they had in their mind: very peaceful, very serene looking settings. I've worked from home for over 18 years. I know some people would, you know, pre-pandemic would give me a hard time about that. Oh, that must be nice. You don't have a commute. You don't have this. All true. But when we get sent home on short notice and maybe don't have a dedicated space, it probably doesn't look like what you see in these pictures. Reality, particularly early on, was we were making it work wherever we could. So maybe at the kitchen table, sharing space with kids, particularly when schools were not in. Middle picture here, you know, maybe being sent to the basement, maybe not even having a work surface at times when everyone was looking for it. So it was really pretty rough the first little bit. And I would suggest that, you know, most people have probably made some provisions since then and hopefully have improved things. But I would suspect that there are people that continue to work from home that were not in an ideal setup. You know, and I can tell you that from firsthand knowledge from doing lots of at-home assessments remotely over the last couple of years, that you know, people were doing their best, but people were not in an ideal scenario all of the time. So other things to consider, you know, at certainly up until most recently, we knew it was a temporary thing, but we didn't know exactly how long it was going to be when it started. And although we're, you know, plans are fairly, you know, becoming more firm here in Alberta that people will be returning to the office, we didn't know how long it was going to be. And I don't think anyone thought it would have been 2 years. So people that are working from home, generally speaking, they were not going to have all the same equipment that they had in their normal office. And I would say that the majority of those people that went home did not have a dedicated office in their home previously. Some may have created more of a space since then, but I would suspect that many are still using a shared space, you know, a room that has another purpose, or maybe you know, have created space in a larger area that that they're calling their office, or their office area. So it's definitely quite different. So what I want to focus on is what's going to happen here in the next couple of months as organizations start to return, and some already have started that gradual return. So as I said from the outset, sort of three different things we could see. We could see people, organizations where everyone returns to the office. We will see some scenarios where people will continue to work remotely. And then what I'm definitely hearing more commonly is a hybrid. So a little of scenario one and a little of scenario two. And what people consider a hybrid varies quite a bit too. Sometimes it's a straight mix of one and two. Sometimes it's people are actually working from home some of the time and then in the office some of the rest of the time. So when you hear somebody talk about a hybrid scenario, you probably, if you're trying to talk about the same thing, you probably want to ask them what they mean by that. Had a great example. I was talking to a hockey dad a couple weeks ago, and he said his organization was aiming for the 50-40-10 rule. I was like, well, what does that mean? He said, well, 50% are coming back to the office permanently, 40% are coming back part of the time. So they're going to have drop-in spaces that they use when they come in, because they're not there much of the time. And then 10% are not returning. So that was kind of an interesting, so that you would consider to be a hybrid model as well. But if you hadn't told me what 50-40-10 meant, I wouldn't have known the difference. So like I said, if you're having discussions and you're trying to compare what you're doing with another municipality or between departments within your municipality, you want to clarify that you're talking in the same language. If you're comparing what's working and what isn't, because you might be thinking you're talking about the same thing, but you aren't. Okay. So if you are having everyone return to the office, or even if it's a department or a work area that everyone is returning to the office, there are definitely some things to be aware of. So the first one is that not everyone will be excited to be back. Um, I don't know what the percentages are. I haven't read any surveys or literature on that recently, but I can tell you there are people that want to get back to the office. There are people that don't want to come back to the office, and there are people that are somewhere in the middle. So, we need to be cognizant of that. It's been a long time at home, and getting ready to be back in that space and with that many people and interacting with that many people and socializing and all those sorts of things. Um, Not everyone will be excited. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to think about how we can approach that. The second thing I would say about returning to the office is I think it's quite possible that individuals have underreported MSI issues that they may be dealing with. And I think that they're more likely to raise concerns once they're back in the office. And a couple of things sort of lead to that, or would make me think that. One is, people have a little bit more freedom and autonomy when they're at home, so they're less likely to complain. And I've had clients who've had people work from home for a number of years, or at least portions of them. And very often when we would go to do a home office assessment, the setup would be less than ideal. And the person that you'd go to see quite often would downplay how much discomfort they were having relative to how poor that setup may be. So people are quite comfortable at home and maybe don't want to give up. They may see that as a perk. And I think that's part of the reason we see underreporting there. The second part is really dependent on what your organization or what an organization was doing for their at-home employees. So that varied quite a bit. Some organizations, other than IT, items really didn't supply any or didn't provide any support. So no chairs, no equipment, no desks. So if somebody had a poor chair and they knew the organization wasn't going to do anything about it anyway, they may be less likely to say something, even though their back's sore. But when they get back to the office and their back is still sore, they might ask for an assessment then, because they know they're more likely to get items provided for them once they're back in the physical office. Now, that's not true in every organization, but it was not uncommon for organizations to not be providing furniture in particular. So if that's the case, I think there's a backlog of people who are probably experiencing MSI related symptoms and haven't said something. So those are a couple of things I think we need to be aware of with people returning to the physical office. So the next thing I'd like you to consider, what are some questions that you want to go away and think about? And, I would encourage you, some of these questions might be more for your facilities people, your HR, your IT people. But these are conversations I think that are worth having. And as we mentioned, the recording for this presentation is going to be on the AMHSA site. So if you want to circle back to it, or share it with somebody, I would encourage you to do that. So some questions to answer if people are returning to the office. Did equipment or furniture go home? What's the plan for its return? If it doesn't happen, what happens if it's broken? So really, what is happening with items that went home? It was interesting. I was talking to a client the other day that we're getting ready to provide some assistance for, and we're going to go in and spend some time on site with their employees for anyone who wants some help. And one of the questions I had is, what if they need something? What if they're, something's broken? What if something's missing? What do I tell them? And after a couple of days, they came back and they said, we don't want you to be collating or collecting anything that's requests for things that are missing. Tell them they need to talk to their manager. So, okay, that's fine. I said, is there a particular reason we're not trying to streamline that a little bit? And the answer was, well, in one particular site, we know there's about 400 chairs that have gone home that have not returned. And we're still trying to work through the logistics of that. And we don't have budget to buy another 400 replacement chairs. So if those don't come back, that's kind of up on the manager the individual managers to try and sort out. So, great that equipment went home in certain organizations, but now there's the logistics of getting that back, right? And what's happened? What do we do if it's broken? All those sorts of things. So, which is part of the reason some organizations were like, nope, nothing's going home. People are on their own. We'll give them some advice, but we don't want our assets outside of our control. Okay, so that's one sort of aspect I would encourage you to put some thought into. The next one is around, what do we do with new employees that haven't been at our organizations, like physically in our organization's area yet, or seen that furniture? Do we have plans for onboarding them to their furniture and their equipment and making sure that they're set up appropriately? There's a percentage in every organization of people that have been hired during the pandemic that have probably never stepped foot in that organization's physical space. Some of them may be really short, some of them may be really tall, some of them may have individual needs that unless we have some sort of process for reviewing that, we're not going to know about. So that is something that requires some thought as well. And then the last thing we'll cover for the idea of everyone returning to the office is, what are some opportunities? So this opportunity that I've got listed here is really to think about, these employees have been out of their office for a long time. And, when they return, I think that is a great time to offer them some training, potentially give them some mini audits or some individual help to make sure that they're set up properly, and just getting them set up and getting some good habits right from the beginning when they return. And, I think we've got clients that do this when they may restack a floor, or people move to a new building, or we've got new equipment. Really, it's like new equipment. We're going back to a space we haven't used in a couple of years. It's a good opportunity to make sure people know how to use it and are getting the best out of it. Okay, so with the return to the office, like I said, there's some potential issues there. There's some questions you need to ask yourself, and there's some opportunities as well. All right. So the next scenario I want to look at is continuing to work remotely. And that could be everyone continues to work remotely, or if you've got pockets of people that are working remotely, there are certainly things to be aware of. So much like I said, there are some people that might not be excited about returning to the office. There may be some people that aren't excited to continue to work remotely. So if we're doing that approach and it's not a choice by the employee, we need to be prepared for potentially some pushback to that. Again, I would say that it's possible that individuals have underreported their MSIs because they've been at home. And I feel that once, a decision has been made or it's communicated that, this is going to be a permanent thing, I think people are more likely to raise a concern. And I think that there will be higher expectations from employees that have to work from home, that they're supported by their employer. Now, you can make the argument, and it's true, that there are benefits to working from home, but I could see a certain subset of individuals that will have expectations. Now, I'm not telling you you do or you don't need to be providing for people that are at home, but just be prepared that when we leave that temporary phase and we're now, this is your workspace, because we've been encouraging people certainly that, you need to make it as good as you can. And if you're planning on working for a longer period of time, you need to make that investment in making that as good as it can be and as good as it needs to be, that those expectations are going to start to show up. And that may dictate where people want to work. Maybe some people don't want to make that investment and they'd rather just go to the office. And those would be the type of people that might not be excited to continue to work remotely. They want to go and have their furniture and all their equipment provided for them and a place that's set up appropriately. So you just have to think about these things from different perspectives. My opinion on where I want to work, and some of you that are on the call, we probably all have different factors that are impacting what our preference is, and we just need to be cognizant that those are going to vary from person to person. So some questions to answer for continuing to have people working remotely. First one is, do we have a formal work from home policy? And if we don't, I think we need one. We might have, some organizations, put some guidance together and things for a temporary basis, but if we're going to have people there more permanently, we need to formalize that. And that wouldn't look just at the equipment that they're using. It would look at other aspects of, when they're expected to be available, securing assets, securing confidential information. All those sorts of factors would play into that. It's not just about ergonomics by any means. Second question I would have is, do you have a method for confirming employee setups are appropriate? Again, if you don't, you should have one. And organizations take different approaches to that. Sometimes they will get employees to kind of fill out a self-assessment form, or they will submit pictures. Some organizations don't want to see pictures of people's houses. It varies, but if we're responsible for the setup, you need to have a certain level of comfort that it's appropriate. And maybe you kind of get away with not formalizing that when we send everyone home on a couple days notice. But if we're going to permanently have people there, we need to be sure we're comfortable with that. And then the last sort of question to answer is, what support are we providing employees to work from home? And, have you thought about providing furniture subsidies for them to purchase appropriate furniture? There's pros and cons on subsidies. Obviously, people are happy to get some support. My experience is, if you give people a subsidy and even if you give them some guidance on that, they're still going to try and find something that's less expensive. And certainly if the amount you're giving them doesn't adequately cover what they would need, I can understand where employees are trying to find something that's less expensive, but something that's less expensive generally isn't going to meet their needs either. So, if we're giving them money that's not going to cover it, or if we're not giving them adequate guidance, or if we're giving them guidance on stuff that's way more expensive than they're going to buy, I can tell you they're not going to buy it anyway. So you're better off trying to find solutions that are, in the price range that's reasonable for employees, and or you give them some cheaper alternatives at the very least. Okay, so those are some things to think about for those that are continuing to work remotely. In terms of opportunities, first one is certainly putting a formal work from home policy in place. And like I said, that would expand well beyond just being set up and set up appropriately. But I think that's something that can definitely be done. And then, as I said, when it comes to guidance on furniture, I've definitely been, the last couple months when I'm doing home assessments with people, asking them what their plan is. Like, are they wanting to go back to the office? Are they wanting to keep working from home? And those that are telling me they want to keep working from home, I'm really encouraging them to make an investment, to make it a permanent, better solution. As I said, if you give guidance in terms of criteria, most people are going to have a hard time with that. It's better just to give them an example of what is going to meet their needs. And if you can do that a couple different price points, that's definitely going to be helpful. And like I said, people will always look for something cheaper, even if you're giving them a subsidy. So best to try and keep that in mind when you're giving examples, that you give them examples that are cost effective. And if something needs to be a little bit more expensive, you explain why, what's different in what they're getting. A $100 chair from Staples versus a $400 or $500 task chair. There's a lot of differences. And if you spell that out for people and you remind them how much time they spend in that chair, all that kind of stuff, maybe they're more likely to spend the required amount of money to get it to be appropriate. Okay. I've seen lots of people that went and bought furniture, and some of it not inexpensive, that doesn't meet their needs. That's because they didn't know, what to get, where to get. Early on, supply chain was a big crunch when it came to home office furniture, and it drove up the prices, and put people in kind of an awkward spot to be maybe not purchasing the best stuff. That sort of resolved itself a little bit, and I think if we, there's opportunity to give people some good guidance and hopefully get them into appropriate equipment, or even to have them have the ability to talk to someone that knows a little bit more about it. I think is quite helpful. All right. And then the last scenario is a little of A and a little of B, the hybrid model. So could mean some people are permanently remote, some are permanently in the office. Could mean all employees have a permanent office but have the option to work remotely a couple days, and it could, or anywhere in between there. So as I said, if you're if you're having a conversation with a colleague from a different organization or a different department, and you're trying to talk about what we're doing a hybrid model, firm up what that is before you get too deep into the conversation on pros and cons. So you would think that this is the easiest way to give everyone what they want, but I can assure you there will still be some people that will not be happy, and that's just a function of how you set it up. You may give people the freedom to be in both places, but maybe your organization is only providing equipment in one of those locations. So they like the opportunity to work from home, but if we don't give them the support, maybe that still makes them unhappy. And not that I'm trying to suggest you should try and please everyone, but we need to be aware that regardless of what scenario we do, there's still going to be people that maybe aren't excited about it. Okay. I'm going to repeat my point about, I think that people have underreported MSIs. And once we've kind of come out of, okay, this is a temporary scenario and we're doing something more permanent, I think those issues are going to come to light. Okay. And I would also repeat that I think expectations from employees, if they're going to be working from home as part of their work expectations, I still think that they are going to have higher expectations of what their employer is doing for them. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's my feeling, is that they're gonna want more from you. So one thing I would add into this hybrid model is a consideration for shared workstations. And this would be applicable if you've got people working remotely, but that maybe drop into the office irregularly, or maybe it's a couple days a week. Basically, if you've got people that don't have a permanent workstation, shared or hotel or drop-in workstations are something we need to give some thought to. And some of your organizations may already have these hoteling or drop-in spaces. For some of you, it may be something completely new. So there are definitely some considerations. First one being, do these spaces accommodate all our users? If not, what's our plan to accommodate taller or shorter users? So if we've got a user adjustable workstation, or if we've got height adjustable keyboard trays, might be less of an issue. But if we've got fixed height desks, what happens if somebody isn't accommodated by that? If it was a permanent workstation, we probably get them ergonomics assessment and give them what they need. But if it's only used part of the time, what do we do about that? along those lines, if individuals do have special equipment, so they have a smaller chair, they have a different keyboard, mouse, etc., where do those items get stored if they're not there permanently? Are we expecting them to cart them back and forth? Is there a place where the chairs go? It gets put away so they have access to it. How do we guarantee access to it? There's definitely some considerations there. And if you've got shared workspaces already, maybe you have a process for that, and then it's a little easier. But if your organization or the department within your municipality hasn't dealt with that before, these are things that we need to have a plan for that. What are the logistics of booking shared space? There's all kinds of different online tools that can be used to do that. And depending on the number of people you have sharing space, some of those could definitely be of value. And then, something we've become more aware of or heightened importance on is certainly that cleaning process for shared workstations. Like what's the process for that? Is everyone comfortable with that? Just further things to think about, particularly if it's new to that work area. Okay. So the opportunities for the hybrid model are the same opportunities we've talked about before. So for the people that are coming back to the office, even if it's only portions of the time, or if they're full-time people, giving them some training, orienting them to that space. We've got new hires, making sure they're onboarded correctly, all those sorts of things. I think that's a fairly easy thing to do. Really think you should have a formal work from home policy if you don't already. The pandemic sped that up for some organizations, but it might not have been formalized, or you might, now that we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic, revisit and firm that up a little bit. I think that's a good opportunity. And then for those that are going to continue to work from home, thinking about giving them guidance on furniture. And we're, like I said, after a few weeks or a couple months, I think from my perspective, we're past the point of, okay, this is temporary, we're going to make it do. Some people have done that because they didn't want to make the investment or couldn't make the investment, which I understand. But if we are kind of indefinitely going to be working from home moving forward, we want to encourage people to make sure that they have an appropriate setup. So I'll wrap up with this slide, and then we will stop the recording and we can open up for questions. First thing I would say is that there's no single correct model. All three can be implemented. They can all be done successfully. You just have some considerations for all of them, and hopefully I've given you some things to think about there. With each of them, there are opportunities to have greater success. And I think if the policies are put in place to support them, all of them can be quite successful. And the last thing I would say is the individuals that we have been seeing for assessments in the home office have often been much, their musculoskeletal injuries have been much more advanced than we would typically see. And I think that ties into people working through the discomfort, underreporting for all the reasons that we've talked about. So, we're going to see people that we're going to continue to see, I think, people that have more advanced MSIs because we haven't been saying something. And I really do think there's a bit of a backlog there that's going to hit the health and safety system and need some attention. And, I think it'd be pertinent to consider how to be proactively trying to see a larger group of people. And, the idea of doing some training, doing some one-on-one assistance combined with some training, just to try and stem that tide a little bit. So rather than waiting for people to put up their hand and say, hey, I've got an issue, trying to proactively get people better set up as they re-enter the office. And then there will still be those people that have got more serious or complex issues that need, a formal individual office ergonomics assessment. But I think, there's some opportunity to be a little bit more proactive and try to see the masses, all of them or as many of them as you can, and then you know, it's just a more effective use of resource to do it that way. All right, I'm going to stop there. And